Welcome back to MidPoint, everybody. Also, let's welcome back Professor of Finance at the Fuqua School of Business at Duke University, Campbell Harvey. Campbell, just a last point then on what we talked about before the break with regard to the Ebola crisis and world economies. What's the solution then to stop this from happening? I mean, this is not something you could just throw money at and expect it to go away. So how do we keep this from becoming something that crashes world markets?
Well, the first thing is that, at least in the U.S., the CDC needs to step up. They basically made these statements that if you follow the protocol correctly, then we can contain the disease. And the public seemed to think that the protocol was being followed. And maybe you could understand the protocol slipping once and somebody mistakenly getting infected. But the second healthcare worker raises the possibility that either there's a gross breach in the standard protocol or there's something else. The something else nobody talks about. And that's basically the possibility of a mutation of this particular virus. And basically we've been told that the only way it could be spread is with basically connection with bodily fluids. And it cannot be spread in the air, so to speak. I guess that's the main thing that worries me, because if it is spread in the air, then it could become a global pandemic. And that's very, very serious.
Let's talk about something called the global risk assessment here. And I think this might be a grand example of what goes on. We never really tend to think more than a week, 2 weeks, maybe 6 months down the road. And before the break, I mentioned, and I try to keep people from smiling at it, because we always think of the asteroid strike, things along these lines, a pandemic. We think about these global disasters. But it could happen, much like anything else. So how bad are we then, as a country perhaps, and as a global economic system, with not thinking ahead, not being 5 years, 10 years down the road and ready for these disasters? This is exactly what happened here.
Exactly. So in my global risk management course, we talk about the catastrophic global risks. That's how we started. And right at the very top are two. One is a global pandemic, and number two is as you mentioned, the asteroid strike. And these both could occur. And it's a question of how much you want to spend today to be ready for it. And I pose the question to my students, well, what happens if scientists determine that with 99.9% probability that there would be a catastrophic asteroid strike in 200 years? How would people react? And I think that a lot of people would say, well, it's not going to affect me or my kids or my grandchildren, so I'm not really that worried, and hopefully somebody in the future will figure it out. And that's the wrong attitude, that we need to be ready today for the potential of these types of disasters. I think pandemic is even more risky. The probabilities are much higher. We're seeing something played out today that is very disturbing. So when it happens in Africa, people kind of sit back and say, well, it's a problem for the Africans, or why should we pay when other countries are just going to free ride? No, this is not just an African problem. This is a worldwide problem. And the U.S. needs to be prepared. The U.S. needs to do its risk management for these catastrophic types of risks. And we're seeing a lot of fumbling right now that is very disturbing.
Is this just then, about a minute or so that I have left here, just another example of the stodgy, stuck in the mud, lack of imagination thinking that we seem to have here in America right now, certainly in so many other countries, but right here, again, the lack of imagination that is the problem?
Yeah, basically the imagination comes from movies. That's where we see this stuff.
Well, it's because we all think that Bruce Willis is going to jump in a ship somewhere and perhaps can save us and take out the asteroid.
Exactly. So I will say there's one positive spin that I can give on this terrible human tragedy of the Ebola crisis, is that it is a massive wake-up call. We now understand the CDC is basically incompetent. I don't see any other way to come to another assessment. And we need to step up dramatically for the next one. So we need to take care of Ebola. Obviously, that's a first priority, but we need to be ready for the next one. And I think that this is a wake-up call.
20 seconds left. Fair to say that the CDC is not the only incompetent factor in all of this. There's plenty more to go around in Washington.
Indeed, and I think you could point the finger in so many places. You can point the finger locally in the hospitals, but again, these hospitals are not prepared, and I think it's incumbent upon the government and the CDC to step up to go on the maximum DEFCON and contain this right now. And once it's contained, it's not over.
Let's
it's
hope
just
they
the
learn.
beginning.
Let's hope they learn. Campbell, Harvey, always a pleasure, my friend. Thanks for joining us. Later this hour, our weekly trek to Outland. Why not to have a corpse living in your home?